Joined today by a man called Zuby, who has lived all over the world. He is, of course, a rap artist from the UK, host of Real Talk with Zuby, the podcast. And we're happy to have him join us in the studio right now. Zuby, thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here, Tucker.
So, since we have some time, your life trajectory is not like most people, certainly unlike mine. So, you're born in the UK to Nigerian parents. Your father's a physician. Mm-hmm. You grew up mostly in Saudi Arabia in a Aramco compound, and then you went to boarding school in the UK.
That's right.
Flesh that out for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure thing. So I was born in the UK in a city called Luton, which is a little bit north of London. Some people may know that, some people won't. When I was a baby, so obviously I don't remember this, my dad got a job offer as a doctor to work out in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. And so whole family moved out there. So all my earliest memories are from Saudi Arabia. I went to preschool there, and then I was there from kindergarten up until 5th grade. After 5th grade, I actually went to the UK for boarding school. So from the age of 11, I was back and forth between the two countries constantly. I did really well in school, got into Oxford University and studied there. That's also where I started my music career and released my first album. And since then, things have grown and expanded, and I've gone beyond just music to doing my podcast, writing my first book, and becoming a voice that people look to and are intrigued by for a lot of different reasons. I do a whole bunch of different things, from music to fitness to public speaking to podcasting. I do a lot of interviews. So the audience continues to grow. In 2019 especially, a lot of people in the USA started to discover me. So my audience has shifted from being primarily UK-based to being international, but particularly large in the US.
So I want to get to how we first heard of you.
Sure.
But I just have to ask, so you're English, you have a British passport.
That's correct.
But you're not living there now.
Well, I've been living in the UK for the past many years. People have been asking me during this trip, I've been in the States now for a couple of weeks, asking me where I live, and kind of like, I don't really know. I guess officially the answer is still the UK, but things have been in flux, of course, for the past...
in that country they have been. So from our perspective, looking across the Atlantic, you think of Great Britain as a pretty stable country.
Yep.
And this is clearly a volatile time in our country. You look across there and it seems maybe even crazier. Is that your perspective? What is going on there exactly?
So at the current moment, I think that the UK is mostly, certainly on a surface level, looking like it's back to normal. It hasn't gone as extreme as places like Australia, New Zealand, perhaps even some provinces of Canada. But for me, I don't necessarily feel like it's the best place for me to be for what I do. So
why is that?
Number one, like I said, with my audience. I mean, the USA, I have more fans here, both for my music, my podcast. I have more customers here. It's a much bigger country, way more opportunity. In terms of my mindset as well, and maybe some of this goes back to me going to an American school in Saudi Arabia, in many aspects, my mindset is a lot more American than it is British. I know that might sound like a weird thing for someone to say.
No, it doesn't.
But when I'm here, I feel more comfortable. I feel actually more embraced. I have a lot of amazing fans, friends, and supporters in the UK and all over the world. But in the US in particular, for whatever reason it is, I feel like a lot of people here have just really embraced me, and they understand my message, and it connects more. And I'm not sort of looked at as much as if it's like, whoa, this guy's really out there. People kind of
So it's freer here is what you're saying.
It's freer.
Intellectually.
Yeah, it's freer. And in the past 18 months especially, that's been particularly highlighted. I think wherever you live, state to state, country to country,
yes,
people have really understood, okay, this stuff does make a difference. It does matter where you are. It does matter who your governor is. It does matter who's running things in the country, because we've seen this huge grasp of authoritarianism. Like I said, if you look at places like Australia and New Zealand and you see what's going on, or you look at even certain Western European countries like France, it's been pretty unbelievable. And I think in the USA, there's a mentality and an understanding of individual rights and civil liberty, which is actually different from how it is in the rest of the world, which a lot of Americans in particular, I believe, take for granted. So here there's the concept that your individual rights and liberty come from God and or natural rights, and the role of the government is to protect them and not infringe upon them.
Right.
In most of the world, including places like the UK, including Europe, etc., the notion, and this is really, really embedded and ingrained in cultures and societies, the notion is that your rights come from the government. So if your rights come from the government, that leads to a very different mentality and way of viewing that civilian-government relationship that is different to here. It's more a notion of positive rights, whereas here it's really fundamentally based on negative rights. And I know there's people in the USA who don't necessarily agree with that or want it to be that way, and maybe they'd prefer it to be.
Or they may not
like
understand that that's the system they inherited.
That's true. That's true. But I think that over the course of centuries, these cultural aspects and societal aspects get embedded in a country.
Yes.
And it gets embedded in the mentality. People don't know. It's just the default. So it's to take something really obvious that most Europeans really don't understand, or most British people don't understand, the Second Amendment.
Right.
Right? That would be the most obvious thing where people, whether you're in, I mean, if you talk to even maybe people in Canada, people in the UK, people in Australia, people all throughout Europe, the concept of the Second Amendment is crazy to most people, right? They're just like, they see a shooting happening, a school shooting, a mass shooting, so why don't they just ban the guns? Just get rid of the guns. The concept is so far removed from the mentality and the politics and the culture there. I mean, in the UK, if a politician or even an individual were to advocate for individual citizens to be able to own firearms, they would be considered an extreme far-right lunatic. It's so far outside of the spectrum and the cultural norm that it's totally unacceptable. Whereas here, that mentality is just different. And of course, it varies state to state. I mean, if you go somewhere like Texas, Arizona, far more people have that mentality. Whereas if you go to certain parts, I don't know whether it's California or perhaps even New York, the mentality overall is very, very different with that. But that's a good example of how that notion of individual rights and civil liberty and relationship between the individual and the government really varies from country to country.
And it's noticeable immediately. I mean, which is why I asked you about your background, because you have lived so many different places and have been immersed in a bunch of different cultures. It's obvious when you come here that it's different.
Yeah, it's very obvious to me. It might not be obvious to everyone, and I think that during peacetime, these differences, the differences between all of the Anglosphere countries,
yes,
it's not really highlighted, right? I mean, it's in 2018, the differences maybe between the USA and Canada and Australia seemed a little bit negligible on a very surface level. But then, like I said, you look at what's going on now, and you can really see how, not just in terms of how the government behaves, but how people respond to the government's behavior is very different, right? How willing and compliant are people to just roll over? The government tells you, stay at home, do this, do that, literally starts dictating every aspect of your life. And you've got people saying like, this is great. We want more of this even. Yeah. Whereas you have other places saying like, hey, no, like don't tread on me, right? That's not the role of the government. Don't force me to cover my business. Don't force me to close my business. Don't force me to stay at home and not see my friends and my family. Don't try to force this on me. Don't try to force that on me, etc. And it's a really different response. And I think anytime there's any form of crisis, whether it's real or it's imaginary or it's manufactured, then that's when you really see the strength of a system, or it really reveals its properties. And I think individual people also reveal their personality.
Yes.
Right? That's when you really, really see what people are about. You see every single closet authoritarian, you know who they are now,
comes
right?
out of the closet. No, that's exactly right.
There are
an awful lot of doctors who turn out to be fascists. I didn't know that. I've always liked doctors.
There you go.
So just one last question about the country of your birth.
Sure.
When you're in London and you're in Great Britain, does anybody ever say, I can't believe what's going on? Here you have Boris Johnson, smart guy, but can't manage his own life. We don't know how many kids he has. It's kind of a disaster personally, telling us how to manage the intimate details of our lives. Like, that's wrong. Does anybody ever say that?
Millions of people do.
They do.
Yeah,
good.
There is a resistance. I don't want it to sound like every British person is a sheep who's just willing to comply with whatever daddy government says. It's not like that at all. I think proportionally though, it's different. And another thing with the USA, and again, a lot of Americans take this for granted, a huge advantage of this country beyond its size and its geographical scale and its population, is that you have states, right? You have 50 different options within your own country where you don't like the way things are going in California, you got 49 other options. You don't like the way things are here, you can move without leaving your whole country. Whereas with lots of other countries, if things aren't going well, this is kind of the position I've found myself in. Like I love the UK. I'm a big fan of the UK. It's a wonderful country in many regards. But I was just feeling like, man, I don't really like the way this is trending. I have a lot of concerns with this direction and this response. And with me, it's like, well, there's nowhere else to go besides literally leaving the whole country, which is bittersweet. It's an adventure, but I don't like the fact that I felt like my hand was forced.
Yes.
That things were going in such a direction where I was like, man, like I don't know. You know, I talk to people who live in all the freedom lovers who are out there in places like Australia right now. It's a bad situation. I mean, you can't leave the country.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself, it's one thing if things
you can't leave the country.
You can't come in. You can't leave. It's gone back to being a penal colony, right?
So why is that better than Cuba? I mean, better beaches? Like what?
This is the thing, and you know, it's also been revealed that a lot of people don't value liberty and freedom, perhaps in the way that we thought that they did, or people claimed to. I think now you're seeing that. You know, I've always had a suspicion that really people value safety and security, or at least the illusion of it, more than they value freedom and liberty, and that's really proven. It's really proven to be the case. I mean, everything that's going on, every government overstep, every bit of authoritarianism or outright tyranny. What's the justification for it? You know, for the greater good, for your health, for your safety. That's always the justification, even if they're clearly going way beyond that.
But it's all from people who have no demonstrated record of success in the field that they're espousing on. Mm-hmm. I mean, Joe Biden last week literally got up there and lectured American parents on how to raise their kids. Yeah. Joe Biden, you know, whatever his good qualities, has no right to lecture anyone on how to raise their children. I mean, are you joking? He should be ashamed. But it's true. But it's true across the board. Yeah. Maybe part of the problem is we have just inept leaders.
Yeah, the thing is, it's also easy to advocate for things that don't affect you.
Right.
Well, this has been one of the biggest problems all throughout. Certainly, I mean, it's always a problem. But over the past 18 months especially, I mean, we've seen this. We've all seen the governors and the mayors and prime ministers, whoever they are, out having their parties and going maskless and not socially distancing and doing this and violating all their rules, going on foreign holidays while they're telling their citizens to stay at home and to wear a mask and to, you know, do this and do that. And I mean, it's like Animal Farm, just that level of outright hypocrisy that's just been rammed in people's faces. You know, it's the same people who will be screaming, defund and abolish the police. Meanwhile, they'll have their own armed security. They'll say that, you know, it's the hypocrisy. You know, it's the hypocrisy. And of course, how many millions of business, I don't know the statistic, how many millions of businesses have been permanently shut down in the USA, right? And the people who made those decisions, they didn't lose a single paycheck. They've been being paid all throughout this whole time. It's easy to advocate for all these policies when they don't affect you. And people don't really have that skin in the game. They're just thinking about votes, and they're thinking about power and money, and they're thinking about control, and they're not honestly representing the people in the proper sense. And those who are anomalous. I think that there are individual, say in the USA or wider, there are individual leaders who are thinking more holistically and thinking, okay, how will this actually affect people in the long run?
Yes.
But they seem to be an anomaly. They seem to be an anomaly. One of the things that struck me the hardest is how so-called liberal countries, democratic countries have, in many cases, had the most authoritarian approaches to this whole pandemic situation. I know people who have gone to places like Albania and Turkey and the Middle East, et cetera, for increased freedom, right? Leaving places like Canada, the UK, in some cases even the USA, certainly Australia, people who are going to places where you'd imagine, you know, again, during a normal time, you wouldn't think, oh, those are freer countries. But that's where we are now. Yeah.
I know two separate people, smart people, rich people who could live anywhere, who've moved to Mexico in the middle of a drug war.
Mexico, yeah, exactly.
Mexico's out of control. Mexico's one of the scariest countries in the world. And they moved there because it's freer.
Yeah.
That tells you a lot. So we first noticed you when you put out a video. Describe this. So one of the trends across the Anglosphere has been the amelioration, or the attempted, of sex differences.
Yeah.
There's no difference between men and women. You can change your sex simply by saying so. You possess magical powers that can override biology. You conducted a kind of thought experiment. Explain it for our viewers who haven't seen this.
Sure. So back in February 2019, I posted a tweet on Twitter. It was a 9-second video of me doing a 230 kilo deadlift, somewhere around 500 pounds, saying, I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as a woman whilst lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. I had about 18,000 followers on the platform at the time.
See, I think that's funny.
I just posted it up. I thought it was kind of funny, so I thought, okay.
That's totally funny.
If I think it's funny, a few other people will think it's funny. Yeah, I might get a couple hundred likes. Next thing I know, this video has blown up internationally. Millions upon millions of views. It's getting covered. Keep in mind, I was there just in the UK minding my business. And next thing I know, it's blowing up in the USA. It's blowing up in Europe. It's blowing up in all these different countries, going viral in different spheres, in the political sphere, the sports sphere, the social commentary sphere. It was just everywhere. People were commenting even in different languages. I was just there looking at my phone, wondering what I'd done.
Did you ever get a medal or any kind of prize for shattering the women's deadlift record?
What I love is if you Google, actually check this, if you Google UK women's deadlift record, it still comes up with my name.
That's awesome.
It's the #1 result. It wasn't officially in a sanctioned competition, so I don't technically have the record, although, but yeah, I didn't know that was going to be the thing that would introduce me to millions of people around the world. But
I was always interested, I think we talked to you at the time, but I forgot to ask you, what was the argument against you? Did anybody attack you for this? And if so, on what grounds?
It was funny because I think part of why it was so powerful was that it was very much a checkmate move, right? Because someone who promotes it and believes in this ideology, they only have two options. They can either recognize me as being the British women's deadlift record holder, because I did break the record, or they have to say, that's not a woman. Right? Like, those are the only two options.
Yes.
Right? And so if you say I'm not a woman, transphobic, bigotry, right? If you ask someone, what is a woman? They say a woman is anybody who identifies as a woman. It's not based on biology. It's purely...
It's magical thinking, yeah.
Exactly. So, and we've seen this promoted for many years. So, okay, if that's the case, then I'm a woman and I'm the British women's deadlift record holder. Alternatively, you're looking at me and my physique and my deep voice and my beard, and you're like, I don't know if that's a woman. But then, so they had this sort of conundrum where they sort of wanted to get angry, but...
On what grounds?
On what grounds, exactly. They couldn't really. And then alternatively, I had people who got mad at me because they said that what I did was unfair to women.
Oh.
So they sort of got it, but they also sort of totally missed the point. It was like, yes, you're correct. That's kind of the point. Some people are like, you're not a real woman. What you're doing is unfair to women. So they sort of missed the satirical. They missed the whole.
Or they make a completely fair point.
Yeah.
But they're applying it only to you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So after that video came out, how did your life change?
Wow, it was a catalyst. So prior to that video, I've been grinding for a long time. I put out my very first album in 2006. So we're 15 years on from that. And that video introduced millions and millions of people to me. And then a lot of times a tweet will go viral. Tweets go viral every day. Things on the internet go viral. But in my case, I myself went viral because people discovered me off of that. And then also found, this guy's a musician. Oh, he's got a podcast. Oh, he's smart. He does this. He does that. He's got an interesting background. So people discovered Zuby through that. And so even though that was 2.5 years ago now, I mean, it wasn't just, okay, this is a little flash in the pan and that goes viral and forget about it. It was like, okay, this is an introduction to an interesting person. Maybe perhaps a parallel would be, this happened on a bigger scale, but if you remember how the world first got to know Jordan Peterson, it was because of his opposition to that Bill C-16 law in Canada, which funnily enough was also somewhat related to transgender issues, where he had an issue with the government forcing people essentially to call people by whatever pronoun they claim. He was saying that this is a huge infringement on freedom of speech. This is compelled speech. So if people remember back to, I think that was 2016, that was the thing that actually launched Jordan Peterson into the spotlight.
Oh, yeah.
But then people discovered this man. People discovered his mind, all of his other work, and he was able to use that to catapult himself to where he is now, selling millions of books and having a gigantic global audience. So something similar has happened with me on a smaller scale, where I've been able to parlay that into a lot of other opportunities and to continue to build my audience and my fan base, and to get my main work, my music, podcast, books, etc., out to more and more people, and for that to be global. Prior to that tweet, my audience was very, very UK centric, and now I can go to virtually any city in the world, and there'll be people who know me.
I got to ask you a cultural question. I have no idea if this is valid or not, but I've just sort of noticed it. In the United States, a lot of immigrants, particularly African immigrants, but not only, they may have, views that I don't share in economics or whatever, but on the cultural stuff, like the gender bending, they look at this and they don't have any problem saying, well, that's insane. That's ridiculous. Is that true in the UK too? Do you think that immigrants to Britain are less likely to go along with the cultural insanity?
I do think so.
You do?
I do think so, yeah, because, I mean, this particular issue, the gender ideology stuff, I mean, 10 years ago in the UK or the USA, people would have been like, no, this is silly.
Yeah.
As recently as 10 years ago.
Really fringe stuff,
yeah. So it's a very new and a uniquely modern Western phenomenon.
Yes,
and I think part of that has been because it's a lot of reasons, but I think part of it is that people are so comfortable. People have been so comfortable for such a long time that they can even have time and mental energy to spend and waste on these debates and these discussions and these ideas and trying to entertain all sorts of stuff, which to someone who's in, most people in Africa or the Middle East or even South America, etc., they're just like, that's just nonsense. Like, what are you talking about? There's men and there's women, like, stop being silly. Let's get on with life. And people have much bigger problems to actually deal with. Not, oh, you didn't respect my pronouns, so this is now some huge thing. People in the Middle East are not debating. People in Afghanistan are not debating what bathroom people should use, or if biological males should compete in women's sports, or what people's pronouns are, etc.
And you think affluence is I suspect you're right, but unpack that a little bit. You think affluence is the difference?
I think when a society becomes very, very comfortable and somewhat unmoored from its foundations and its traditions, then anything there's room to entertain nonsense, right? Like you can afford to. People often use the term first world problems. Yeah. Right? Which we all have, right? I'm sure we've all complained about things which in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of problems, it's very, very minor. Oh my gosh, there's no Wi-Fi. Oh my gosh, they ran out of guacamole in my favorite burrito place. And people make it seem like this is a huge, huge problem because by our standards, maybe it is. But you're saying there are places with no Wi-Fi? Billions of...
Come on now. Settle down, Zuby. You're freaking me out.
Wi-Fi. Let's try to get clean water and electricity, man. I mean, people forget that billions of people in the world live in poverty and in squalor without access to basic resources. Here, I'll tell you something that really, really hit me one time. And I've told this story before, but I was in, I think it was the last time I was in Nigeria, and I was I was talking to a young man who I kind of just met out and about, and we were talking about travel, and he heard my accent, so he thought I was American, as many people do. And I was saying, oh, I'm from the UK, and he was just asking me, what's the UK like, what's America like? He's like, I really want to go to America. I really want to go to America. I said, oh, what makes you go to America? And he said, in America, even the poor people are fat.
True.
And I laughed, but also that was quite deep. I was like, wow, okay. So you've got parts of the world where people are dying because there's not enough food to eat. And you've got places in the world where people are dying because they're eating too much food. There's so much access, there's so much excess that people can afford to literally eat themselves to death. And when you really think about that, it's quite humbling, and it gives you that sense of gratitude and perspective of where we have. So I think any society that can become too excessive or too decadent, then you can afford to get unmoored from reality because there aren't really as many consequences to it. Or I think people often try to create problems. I think that because there are actual problems in our countries that should be dealt with, but I think oftentimes people lose track of that and they end up sort of creating new problems. I think you're seeing this a lot even with a lot of activism these days, where if you were to go back to the 1950s or the 1920s or any time in the past, activism was a lot more real because there was genuinely a clear problem that people are being activists for and they're trying to resolve, right? They're truly fighting for social justice. There's an inequality here, whether it's between men and women, or it's between black people and white people, or it's this or it's that, and there's a real cause here. Whereas now you still get that same level of emotionality and activism, but it's often based on nothing or on nonsense, or people don't know what it is. I remember a couple years ago when every year they were having those women's marches when they were out wearing those pink kitty hats or whatever.
I do remember that, yeah.
What were they marching for?
I don't recall. In fact, I never knew.
Neither did they, right?
Right.
Women's equality. Okay, like what? What specifically? Smash the patriarchy. Like
already happened. Sorry, too late.
Right?
That's why you're so mad.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why you're so angry.
Yeah.
We smashed the patriarchy and you hate the results.
This is the thing, right? And again, I've got that perspective, right? I grew up in Saudi Arabia.
Uh-huh.
So if someone wants to see a society where actually there are different laws for men and women and there is different treatments, that does exist still around the world.
Oh yeah.
But that's not the fight. That's not the fight that they're fighting. If they were advocating for that, if they were advocating, okay, we're fighting for women's rights across the world or something like that, then it's okay, cool, I can.
Well, they had some lady in a burqa up on stage, didn't they? Linda Sarsour, some unhappy westernized Arab lady who was like for Sharia law, but she's also for the liberation of women. It's like, it's nonsensical.
I don't know. But yeah, I think that's the root of a lot of the issues. I think even with the response we've had in the past 18 months, again, if you compare the response even with, so here's something no one talks about, right? No one talks about Africa over the past 18 months.
True.
Right? Nobody talks about Africa.
Tell us what we're missing.
Missing a lot. So I know according to official statistics, the entire continent of Africa, first of all, has had less COVID-related deaths than just England.
Now, how can that be true? You've got the poorest continent out of 7.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, by definition, a dysfunctional healthcare system because it's poor.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And a continent with a history of real infectious disease problems.
Yep.
And it's got a hot climate, which appears to be in some way connected to a lot of viruses, certainly. What is that?
Yeah. So I have a few hypotheses on it, but my initial point is, why isn't anyone asking that question and trying to see what's going on there?
Because we only care about Africa when it's morally useful.
Exactly. Right?
So there's no obvious lesson that we can take from that makes ourselves feel more virtuous.
No.
So we totally ignore it.
Exactly. What is it?
Just in point of fact, what do you think that is?
I think firstly, some factors are simply demographic. You've got a much younger population. I mean, I think the average age in Nigeria is 19 or 20.
Yep.
The median age versus...
Is that true? The median age?
Median age is 19, I think, in Nigeria.
Wow.
And in much of Africa, population skews much younger. As we know, with this particular disease, particularly affects older people, especially people 60 plus with comorbidities. Far lower obesity levels.
Yes.
As we know, I think last stat I saw was something like 78% of people in the US who were hospitalized or who died with COVID were overweight or obese, right? So that's a factor. Out and about, people being out and about, getting vitamin D, immunity from previous diseases. A lot of people do take certain anti-malarial and anti-parasitic drugs just as on a regular basis to protect them from other diseases.
Because malaria still exists.
Which may offer some protection against COVID, which you're not really allowed to talk about in many areas.
Wait, why wouldn't you be allowed to talk about that? I mean, why are certain medicines taboo? Like, what the hell?
This is the thing, man. I believe it's because of the profit incentive. I believe it's because of the profit incentive. So, you know, there's obviously a gigantic multi-pronged push for the vaccines and for everyone to get that, et cetera. There was the emergency use approval authorization, which I believe can only be available if there's no alternative treatments available. And I think a lot of it has been greed. And now you've got those policies on social media platforms and on YouTube, et cetera, where you're literally not even allowed to discuss alternative treatments, which is a very concerning level of censorship, which has very dangerous ramifications. People keep saying, follow the science, you know, science this, science that. And it's like, well, if we can't even talk about certain ideas, like I don't know all the ins and outs. I haven't done all the studies on various treatments.
But here's what we know. Pfizer has a product that they want to sell to governments around the world. Mm-hmm. There are, at least theoretically, competing products, therapeutics, that would lessen the need for a vaccine.
Yes.
So at Pfizer's behest, the big tech company shut down any discussion of alternatives, and so you kind of have no choice but to buy the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't believe they would have even been able to get the emergency use authorization if another product were available. And it's important to note that with many of these...
So why can't you get Google to do that for you? You make music, but so does Beyonce, so maybe we should just shut her down on Google. She doesn't exist, and everyone has to buy your music.
Why don't we do that?
I'm just saying, like, this is insane.
It is insane, you know? I mean, this is why it's so weird, and it's created this chill. I mean, even me sitting here talking about this, I'm feeling like, oh gosh, like, are they gonna come after me now, right? And
answer, yes, they are.
And the thing is, people shouldn't feel that in these countries.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, you just said something, I just wrote Africa COVID on this paper because we're going to do this subject on the Nightly Show, because what you said was just so interesting. But your dad's a physician, he's a medical doctor from Nigeria.
Yeah.
And so, like, what does he think of this? The fact that, as you said, the entire continent of Africa, as far as we know, has recorded fewer COVID deaths than just the little island of Great Britain. Is that what you said, I think?
Yeah, I believe that's true. Someone can...
we'll check it. But I mean, they've had a notably low number of people die of this disease that has killed millions worldwide. Like, what do people who practice medicine in Africa think of this? It seems like kind of a big story.
I don't know. I don't know. I do have a lot of followers over there in various countries who, you know, DM me and send me messages about, okay, like what's actually going on there. And here's another thing that's interesting is that, and not a lot of people have spoken about this, is the response and the approach that was taken in many Western countries. I'm talking about the lockdowns and the stay-at-home orders, all these tough restrictions. Lots of those were only enabled by technology. Okay, so in San Francisco, in New York, in all of these cities, in London, in Sydney, you can tell people, hey, just stay home, shut your business, do Zoom calls, work from home. Kids can just do remote learning. All of these things are merely enabled by technology. So that approach isn't even an option in a huge amount of the world. You can't tell people to work from home unless their job can be done remotely from a computer, right?
Good point.
Exactly, and very few people make this point. Even if you were to go back to the year 2000, this response that has these governments have had would not have been possible. Maybe for a couple weeks you could have done it. Maybe you could say stay home for a couple of weeks, take kids out of school for a couple of weeks, all of that. But very quickly people would have been like, look, we got to make money. I've got to go to work. The kids have to go back to school. We need to get on with this. We need to live with the virus. And that's something that a lot of people don't want to accept. So I think it's interesting how the technology has actually enabled the response, both in this time frame and in particular countries, whereas in others it wasn't possible. Another thing that's interesting on the Africa point. Sorry, my brain is jumping around a lot.
No. This is sincerely interesting.
Yeah, another really interesting thing, and I've seen people in. One follower in particular made this point to me, and it was like, man, that makes total sense. And it was, in Africa, you have diseases like malaria.
Yeah.
Malaria is far more dangerous and deadly than COVID.
Of course.
So
it's also chronic. Even if it doesn't kill you, wreck your life.
Yeah, and people in various African countries have been dealing with malaria for many decades. It's just part of life. You don't shut down society because of malaria. And so I think when more information started to come out about this particular disease and its severity, I mean, you have to remember, back in the early days, people were thinking that this potentially had a 4% to 5% fatality rate across the general population. It's turned out, thank God, to be far lower than that. So I think he was just saying that a lot of people where he lives are just like, well, we've got malaria. Malaria is way worse, and we live with that every day. So like, let's just get on with life. Let's not. And then you've got the other extreme response. If you look somewhere like New Zealand, one case, no hospitalizations, no deaths, one case, shut down the entire country. Whole country right now is shut down because of one case. What's the exit strategy? How do you get out of that? It's a coronavirus. You're not going to get it down to zero eternally. Right? People have to.
Well, it lives in animals, so there's no way to end it.
Exactly. There's animal vectors. So just like we haven't got rid of the cold, we haven't gotten rid of the flu. These things just.
So I guess we know if you wanted to intimidate New Zealand, and that lunatic mediocrity who runs it, you'd know what to do. One COVID case and they shut the country down.
Yeah.
They'd surrender.
Yeah. So at this stage, my message to people has just been like, look, guys. I mean, I personally believe, and from what I understand from a medical standpoint, this particular virus and disease, it's going to be endemic.
Yeah.
It's there, like we have the cold, we have the flu, we have certain diseases which, they have a certain season, they come up, some people unfortunately get sick, some people unfortunately die. There's various things you can do to protect against them to the best of your ability, but we can't just stop the entire world. We can't just shut down society, infringe on people's liberties and rights, etc., eternally, because there's a virus going around. Because if you do that, I mean, by the year 2050, we'll still be here. New Zealand will still be in lockdown because they're still going to be getting positive cases, and everyone's
so
just
maybe
gonna be
that's
sad
the
and
point
miserable.
of it.
Man.
I mean, so you wake up one morning and there's this terrifying new virus coming out of central China, and it's super scary. Scared the hell out of most people, me for sure. And then you think, what's the most effective public health response to it?
Yeah.
And then you wake up one morning a year later and you realize, wait, this is not about public health. This is a power grab.
Yes.
And this really is the tool that forces are using to destroy the society I grew up in, and everything about it that I liked is now gone.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how long it'll be till people realize that's what's actually happening.
I do think people are waking up. I don't think I know. I know that people are waking up because I know a lot of people. Period. But over the course of this time, from say February 2020 up until where we are now at the end of August in 2021, there were a lot of people who, for the first couple weeks, they were like, man, for the first couple weeks, I was very worried. I was, bleaching my groceries. I was doing, staying. And then more information comes out, and they're like, okay, it's not. Again, this is a good thing, by the way. This is nowhere near as. I mean, in the USA, they were predicting up to 3 to 4 million.
I remember very vividly.
People
I went and
dying.
talked to Trump about it. I mean, I was really worried about it based on those projections. Yeah. Not for me, but for the country.
Yeah, and I think in the UK, I think they predicted half a million to 1 million people dying. Yeah. And that didn't happen. Of course, look, I feel bad for anyone who loses a person to anything, including this particular disease. But in a reasonable and rational society, you'd look at that and you'd adjust as you go on. Perhaps it's better to have an overreaction than an underreaction to begin with. But if you continue to overreact, especially when the policies have such dangerous downstream repercussions in the short term and the long term, economically, financially, socially,
spiritually. You destroy Christianity in the country?
Well, they kept the strip clubs open and shut down the
abortion
churches.
clinics were fine. They give money to the Democratic Party. Churches were closed.
Yeah, strip clubs, abortion clinics open. So this is, I was saying from early on last year that I think that the response is far more dangerous and deadly and has more ramifications than the virus itself. And I maintain that position. I mean, now you've got people openly talking about medically segregating society. Creation of a two-tier society has never been good.
Because some people are dirty. The people who don't vote for us are inherently unclean. Where have I heard that before?
Yeah, it's just not a good position. And
No.
I think a lot of people have been so demoralized, and there have been certain narratives pitting people, just like during the Brexit era, during the Trump era, there was the pitting of people against each other. During the whole BLM summer last year, there was the pitting of people against each other, right? Doing it via race, doing it via politics, doing it via this. Now it's the same thing's happening, but it's happening about vaccination status or the response here. And I'm just like, look, everybody, I don't care left, right, Democrat, Republican, Labor, Conservative, whatever. My overall message is really one of liberty and one of just human decency and fairness and respecting other people's choices.
Right.
And not discriminating or being unkind to people based on really based on propaganda, based on what has been put in people's heads by elements in the media and elements in politics, right? And just look, man, like I respect people's decisions. If you're an adult, I trust that you can decide what's the appropriate response for you. If you want to stay at home, I've said this from the beginning. If you want to stay at home indefinitely, whether that's logical or illogical, whether you want to wear a mask, you can go.
Up to you, yeah.
It's up to you. I've never said you shouldn't be allowed to do this. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm just like, look, man, it's your choice. We all have different. We're all different people. The risk of different things is different for different people based on your age, based on your weight, based on your general health status. Some people have certain medical conditions. There are people who take a medicine that we generally consider totally safe, penicillin, for example, right? There's people who are deathly allergic to penicillin.
Yeah.
There's people who are allergic to peanuts. There's people who can be killed by a peanut. Should we ban peanuts and peanut butter and just no one can have peanuts and peanut butter because some people? No, it's like you let people make that choice. If you're allergic to peanuts, you take extra precaution, right? If you're at risk or you're very close, you take whatever precaution you think makes sense. The notion that the government knows what's better for you or cares more about your family than you do is utterly absurd. We didn't even talk about how in the last year there were all these policies where people who were sick or dying and they weren't allowed to visit them. They weren't allowed to see them. Right? How many people have died over the past 18 months without being able to see their friends, see their loved ones, see their family because supposedly of COVID policies? I mean, it's heartbreaking and it's cruelty. It's not justifiable. It doesn't make sense. I'm also seeing what's been going on with children who, again, amazingly, I mean, if this virus was running through children and just killing tons and tons of children and young people, we'd really be dealing with something terrible. But we know that children are not at massive risk from this. We know that statistically, the flu is more dangerous to children than COVID. We know this. This is factual data. People saying follow the science. Let's actually follow the science. No one prior to this year was advocating for children to be masked in schools and to be socially distanced and sitting in plexiglass and doing all of this weird stuff because of the flu. And this is really trying to placate neurotic adults. It's not care and concern genuinely for the health and well-being of children. Or if it is, it's certainly misplaced. And so when I'm just seeing all of these policies, that's why I speak out so much. I just feel compelled to speak out about it because some people are doing it, but not a lot of people are not. And I genuinely believe that the downstream repercussions of this for our society, our societies, could be very, very dangerous and hard to and irreversible if we're not careful. I feel like, you know, a lot of people are kind of running down this collective cliff and are not thinking. They're just sticking to one narrative, and they're just, you know, listening to the one or two experts that they've been told to listen to. They're not questioning anything. In fact, they're being punished for asking questions. And people aren't looking up and just going, okay, what's going on? But I'm ever the optimist. I do believe in the human spirit, and I think that more and more people are. There have been so many inconsistencies and hypocrisies, and they've kicked the can down the road so many times now that I do believe that people are waking up to this. You've got people who went out, they say, oh, you know, they got their vaccine, you know, they wore their mask, they stayed home, they wore their mask, they got their vaccines, they got their second doses, they did everything they were told they were supposed to, and then they're being told that they should still stay home, or they should put their mask back on, or they should do this, or they should get another shot, and they should keep getting it. So I think everybody, everyone has a different breaking point, I guess. Some people eons ago, more than a year ago, were like, okay, like I'm not really buying into this. But I think even those who were very, very compliant with it and concerned about the initial threat at this stage are sort of looking up and thinking, this doesn't make sense. And also the people telling me that I should be doing all this, we're also seeing them not following their own rules.
So I want to agree with you. You've clearly thought deeply about this. So you seem to be suggesting that there is a point, and it's imminent, it's coming up soon, where people will say, you know what, now you're telling me I have to have 3 shots? You know, it's too much. You don't know what you're doing. I'm not playing along anymore.
Yeah.
You actually think large groups of people will start to say that?
I do think so. I think that it's important I think conversations like this are also extremely important because they give people space. It shifts the Overton window a bit, and it gives people space. Right now, if you talk to people on an individual level, a lot of people, again, regardless of, you know, someone's socio-political views or their thoughts maybe back in February 2020, most people on an individual level recognize that a lot of the policy and a lot of what's going on doesn't make sense. It absolutely doesn't make sense. And if you speak to people individually, they'll recognize that in private. What's going on, though, is with human beings really being, you know, we very much consider ourselves individuals, but there's a large herd element to human behavior. People don't yet feel safe and comfortable necessarily expressing that publicly because they don't want to be that one guy who's there like, does this make sense? Everyone knows it doesn't make sense to walk into a restaurant. I mean, globally, right? Let's take one silly policy. This whole thing of someone walking into a restaurant with a mask on and then walking a few steps to their seat and taking it off, and everyone's eating and drinking and laughing and joking without their masks on for hours, and then they stand up again, put their mask on. That's pure theater. There's nothing scientific about that. It's absolute nonsense, as if COVID only exists in the doorways, or it only gets you when you're standing up. Absolutely unscientific. And this happens all over the world. Everyone I've spoken to agrees that is absurd. It doesn't make sense, but most people still do it. So I do think there will be that point where, just as we fell into this very quickly, and if you look at human behavior now compared to human behavior in January 2020, people are doing and saying a lot of things that would have been unfathomable back then. Just like people slipped into it very quickly, I think there will be another tipping point back in the opposite direction. You're also seeing that a lot of the doomsday predictions are not manifesting in the way people claimed. In Europe, for example, you had countries like Sweden. You had a country like Sweden, which they never shut down. They never had a mask mandate. They fared, I believe, statistically better than somewhere like the UK. If you look in the USA, if you look at the different states, you got 50 different states. Look at places like Texas and Florida. I mean, you'll remember back in was it March, when the Texan governor dropped all of the mandates and restrictions, and the response was, wait 2 weeks, you know, everybody in Texas is going to get sick, everybody's going to die, da da da. It didn't happen. Texas is fine, right? So, and no one goes back and goes, no one holds the people who said that accountable. I mean, Joe Biden himself said it wasn't what Neanderthal thinking. This Neanderthal thinking, you know, they're saying everyone's going to die, and I've just been in Texas, and Texas is fine. It's very free, it's very open, it's normal.
Oh, it still exists?
Yeah, there's still people there, unless all my friends are dead.
So I want to close this out with the question I've asked a lot of different people. So we look for people who are standing outside the herd and saying what they think is true, and there are not many of them. You're definitely one of them. And so I always ask, what makes you different? And before I do that, I want to frame it with a clip from our show from October of 2019. This may have been the first time that we spoke, in which you describe what happens to people who encourage others to think freely. Here it is.
He's clearly thinking for himself and encouraging other people to do the same thing. And I stand by that 100%. That's what Kanye has always stood for. I think people are surprised that he's shifting sides a little bit in terms of the way people view things politically, but ultimately his message isn't telling people who they should vote for or who they should support, what candidate they should go for. But it's basically just telling people, look, think for yourself. You are not owned by any party, any politician. You have the right to think for yourself, not as a monolith. I think that's
well. I mean, we both know you're not allowed to think for yourself. I mean, let's not get crazy here. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing or how far he was willing to go until I read this, and I'm quoting: "Democrats had us voting for Democrats with food stamps for years, guns in the 80s, taking fathers out of the home, Plan B, lowering our votes, making us abort our children."
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, heavy. That's exactly right. Heavy.
Yeah.
Once you say that, that's kind of it. You've made your break, I think.
Yeah, heavy stuff. I mean, so I'm from the UK.
Yes.
But as someone who's from the UK for well over a decade, since I started thinking about anything politically, I have always looked at the fact that black Americans vote around 90% for the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Which is weird. I mean, any demographic group voting that much in favor of one party sort of raises questions, especially when you've got a lot of cities where that party is in charge and people are not happy with the way things have been going for multiple decades.
Yes, that's right.
And rather than looking at the other side or questioning, there's just this sort of allegiance to it. Now, I myself am not a black American. I don't want to speak for any other people other than myself, but again, I think the core message, both in what I put out there and what I think Kanye West and similar people are putting out there, is not saying, look, you need to become conservative, you must vote Trump, you must vote Republican, anything like that. I think it's just saying, like, look, there are alternate perspectives here. And firstly, it's okay to voice an alternate perspective without being demonized and attacked. I mean, we're seeing what's happening. Lots of the stuff that happened with him in 2018 when he first came out and had some positive things to say about Trump or about conservative values or anything like that. I mean, he got mobbed, and that's because he's such a huge cultural figure, both within and outside of music. So if someone with his gravitas is saying that and then going out there and getting Jesus is King trending on Twitter and becoming the biggest album in the world, that's a threat to a lot of people. It sounds weird and it sounds backwards, but that is genuinely a threat to...
Well, tell me if this has happened to you. I think of course it's a threat. It's also a wonderful opportunity for the rest of us to hear these issues discussed. I mean, there's a narrow range of things that we talk about. It's boring. Yeah. It'd be interesting to talk about whether or not Jesus is king, I think. But no one wants to have those conversations, and so they dismiss him, as you know, and many others. Does that happen to you?
It does. Well, it's attempted. It doesn't work on me. It doesn't work on me. Anyone who would try to cancel me is not part of my true audience anyway, so it's not something that I personally fear. I'm not someone who's shifted much politically over the years. I've just become a little bit more vocal about some of the things I'm saying, because you're seeing all this, just culture is just in a weird place in a lot of ways. So it seems like anyone who goes out there and promotes self-reliance and self-empowerment and self-improvement and isn't just trying to point the fingers outside and blame everybody else or blame other factors, that person's going to get demonized. Anyone who encourages other people to think freely and not just go along with the kind of weird, woke, progressive identity politics games that are being played, especially if you're a minority. It doesn't even matter if you're whether you're black, Asian, Latino. Same thing. I've spoken to people. Same thing happens with, say, someone who's gay but doesn't go along with all of the LGBT stuff.
Right.
Those people get demonized because it's almost like you're some kind of apostate or traitor or something like that. So I'm followed by a lot of black and minority conservatives, say in the USA, and they kind of confide in me, like, man, it's tough, right? They get attacked more. Yeah.
Because if I can just say, you're calm, clear, cheerful, That works. People can hear you.
I try.
When you present and you succeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
So I remember that moment really well when you said that. It's more true now than it was then. So let me just ask you the question. That is correct.
Yeah.
In moments of profound conformity like this one, anyone who acts, who lives as an apostate is crushed because he might be an example to others. But you've decided to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Why?
Number one, I think it's just in my character and my personality to be like that. I'm always willing to go against the grain. I'm just an independent thinker. I've been like that since a kid. So I think that's a part of it. With this issue in particular, though, I think I feel a moral and an ethical compulsion because I see where it could go. I see where it could go, right? I'm not an expert at history, but I am a student of history. I know a lot about human psychology, both on an individual level and on a group level, and I'm seeing dangerous elements popping up. One of the darkest realizations over this time period for me has been I now really understand how some of the worst things that happened in the 20th century, I understand how they happened.
For sure.
This is not me saying, directly comparing the COVID response to Nazi Germany or whatever, but from a psychological perspective, whether that's people policing each other and snitching on their neighbors, whether that's this designation of people into two different categories and wanting to treat them differently. Right? Whether this is people saying nasty stuff like, oh, well, if someone doesn't get the vaccine and they get sick, maybe they should be denied health care. Maybe you should just let them die, or I hope that they die. All of that kind of, honestly, quite psychotic behavior and the groupthink and the herd mentality, I know where that can lead in humanity because it's happened multiple times in the past. In my own lifetime, Rwandan genocide, right? You've seen it happen before. And I often say that people think history is just in the past, but right now we're living in the history of the future. So everything that human beings have been through before, it can happen again. And we always need to be cautious and we need to be vigilant of that. That's why we need to be very careful about not giving up rights, not giving up freedom, not giving up liberty. People used to fight for that. We had ancestors who fought and died for freedom and for liberty, and now people are fighting to give it away and to have it taken away from other people. So that's why I feel that compulsion. I think it's both a personality trait in general, but also with this in particular, I feel like if I don't speak up, then I'm complicit.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think the way you described it is inspiring.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. You're a brave man, a smart man. Zuby, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it, Tucker. Thank you.
Thank you. Tucker Carlson Today is the name of the show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Nation. Of course, we'll see you every weeknight, 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.
Always stay real, never been a slave, so I'm never gonna kneel. I don't play it safe, I don't care how they feel. From the cradle to the grave, I'ma always stay real. Always stay real, never been a slave, so I'm never gonna kneel.